Hi, everybody. Mrs. Somick here as we continue on into lesson 4 today of our fiction unit. Now, remember, yesterday we talked about our POV, our point of view, first person or third person. So, today we're going to get into what we call our elements in fiction stories. And this is going to go along very closely with what we call our plot. Now, readers of fiction, they understand that all fiction stories include 5 basic elements. Okay. And to talk about those 5 basic elements, you guessed it, I got another vocabulary that I'm going to show you this morning here or afternoon, whatever time you're watching my video. So let me pull that up for you. And they are going to discuss those 5 elements that a fiction story would have. I hope you enjoy.
Check it out, yo. Yeah. Setting, that's like where it's going down. Could be the train compartment, a castle, or a town. Could be the Arctic winter like to build a fire. The temperature's dropping, excitement's getting higher. Setting sets the scene, so the scene seems set. Could be an Italian restaurant where we met. Setting gives us the where and the when. Could be modern day, the future, or way back when. Plot, character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. It's the action, the quest for satisfaction. What's going down, what's going to happen? 4 men at sea in an open boat, rowing and hoping that they can stay afloat. The plot, they had to make it to the beach, but the waves are big and the shore seems out of reach. Plot is a series of events like Lemony Snicket. It could be crazy, wild, or straight wicked. Plot, character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. Knock, knock. Oh, it's the characters, the people in the story who carry out the action. Characters can be pretty tiny or clean. Characters can be silly, whiny, or mean. Jet is a character, and so is Romeo. Pokemon has characters, and so is Yu-Gi-Oh! Characters can be dogs, lions, or hippos. J.K. Rowling chose Harry Potter. Who knows? Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. You snack back in your backpack, we're not finished. Something going wrong. That's the conflict, kids. A struggle in the plot. Now who's on top? Could be a fight for money, like some robbers and cops. Could be an internal conflict, a struggle inside. Like I don't wanna tell the truth, but I don't ever wanna lie. Fix something in your eye. Now you're conflicted. What created drama? The conflict did. Plot, character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting. The theme of the story is the main idea, the central belief or the topic that's in there. It's usually something abstract like sacrifice, isolation, and resurrection. We back to life like don't lie, don't practice lie. Oh, the theme of to build a fire is survival. Survivor on your own like 5-0. What? Vocabulary something that you have to get. Character, conflict, setting. Yes, these are the 5 things that you're gonna be needing when you're reading or writing a short story that's mad exciting.
Love that one. That's great. I hope you enjoyed it here. So let's head back to our flip chart here. Now we've been introduced to those 5 basic elements, okay? And just to kind of tie it along here with beginning, middle, and end of what we discussed last week, we now know that our 5 basic elements are our character, setting, problem, plot, and then we're going to end with this resolution that goes along with the theme, as they said. Writers of fiction often use descriptive or sensory language, okay, to help readers visualize what characters look like, the setting, the actions that are unfolding. And by noting these 5 elements of fiction stories, readers can deepen their enjoyment, of course, but also their understanding. Now, today what we're going to do is we're going to read a story entitled The Rough-Faced Girls by Ralph Martin, okay? And as we read the story, I want you to take notice of things that sound maybe familiar to you, because this is actually very similar to the story of Cinderella. So we're going to be making some comparisons with that, especially later on this week. So there's many versions of this popular tale, and this is the version told by the Algonquin, a Native American tribe. And as I read, pay close attention to the noticings that I make about the elements of the story. So when I mean the elements, what do I mean? Let's pay close attention. Who are our characters? Where and when for our setting is the story taking place? What is the problem that our rough-faced girl is going to face here? Now, our plot, as we develop more into the middle of our story, let's listen to the events that move the story along. How do our characters develop? Okay, and it's going to even elaborate. It's going to give us more details about the problem that our character is facing. Now, towards the end, we're going to be resolving that problem, and the action is going to come to a conclusion. And with that, we'll be able to identify an overall theme. Now, theme is very important, and that's something that we're going to elaborate more on towards the end of this week, but we'll discuss it a little bit today. All right, so character, setting, problem, plot, and resolution. Sounds like Mrs. Sommick's puppy dogs are excited too for our story today. You may hear them barking in the background. All right, as we go through, we're going to be reading The Rough-Faced Girl. Once long ago, there was a village by the shores of Lake Ontario. Off from the other wigwams of this village stood one great, huge wigwam. Painted on its sides were pictures of the sun, moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. And inside this wigwam, there was said to be a very great, rich, powerful, and supposedly handsome, invisible man. However, no one could see him except his sister, who lived there too. Many women wanted to marry this invisible being, but his sister said only the one who can see him can marry him. So kind of similar to like our Prince Charming, right? From Cinderella. Okay. Now, in the village, there lived a very poor man who had 3 daughters. The 2 older daughters were cruel and hard-hearted, and they made their younger sister sit by the fire and feed the flames. And when the burning branches popped, the sparks fell on her. And in time, her hands became burnt and scarred. Her arms, too, became rough and scarred, and even her face was marked by the fire. Her beautiful long black hair hung ragged and charred. And those 2 older sisters laughed at her, saying, "Ha, you're ugly, you rough-faced girl." And they made her life very lonely and miserable indeed. Let's think about some of the elements we've already been introduced to. So who have we, as far as the characters go, who have we learned about that the story's going to be about? We know the invisible being and his sister, right? And the sister said the only person who can marry him is one who can see him. And then we've met about this poor older man who has 3 daughters. 2 of them, are they nice? No, they refer to them as cruel and hard-hearted. So got 2 evil sisters and 1 poor youngest sister who they refer to as the rough-faced girl. Okay, take note again of that sensory detail as we talk about her long hair being ragged and charred and her face being burnt and scarred, painting quite a visual in your mind. One day, these 2 sisters went to their father and said, "Father, give us some necklaces. Give us some new buckskin dresses. Give us some pretty beaded moccasins. We are going to marry the invisible being." So their fathers gave them these things. Dressed in their finest, the 2 girls marched through the village. All the people pointed and stared. "Look at those beautiful girls," they said. "Surely they shall marry the invisible being." And if those 2 girls were proud and hard-hearted before, they were even prouder now. They walked haughtily through the village. At last they come to the wigwam of the invisible being, and there was his sister waiting. What do y'all think is going to happen next? "Why have you come?" she asked. "Well, we want to marry the invisible being," they answered. "That's why we're here." "If you want to marry my brother," she replied, you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen the invisible being?" "Well, of course we've seen him," they insisted. "Can't you see how pretty we are? Can't you see the beautiful clothes we wear? Oh, yes, anyone can tell that we've truly seen the invisible being." "All right," she said quietly. "If you think you've seen him, then tell me, what's his bow made of?" And suddenly her voice was as swift as lightning and as strong as thunder. His bow? They stammered in surprise. His bow. "Oh, well, we know, we know." But turning desperately to one another, they whispered, "What shall we say?" "Let's say it's an oak tree," she said. "It's the great oak tree." "No," said the sister of the invisible being. "No." Oh, she saw at once that they had lied. "Tell me," she continued, "if you think you've seen my brother, the invisible being, then what's the runner of his sled made of?" "Oh, well, we know," cried those 2 sisters. But whispering feverishly again, they wondered, "What shall we say? What shall we say? Let's say it's the green willow branch." "No," said the sister when she heard. No, you have not seen my brother. Now go home. Just test us fairly, they exclaimed. We've seen him. Just don't ask us all these silly questions. All right, said the sister of the invisible being. Come with me. And she took them back to the great wigwam and sat them in the seats farthest from the entrance, the guest seats. Soon they heard footsteps coming along the path, and then something stepped inside. Though they heard breathing, the two sisters still couldn't see a thing. Suddenly, a great bow and a beaded quiver of arrows appeared in the air and were set down. But though those two girls sat there, their eyes wide, all through that night they never saw a thing more. And in the morning, they had to go home. Ashamed. Are they ashamed? The next day, the rough-faced girl went to her father and said, Father, may I please have some beads? May I please have a new buckskin dress and some pretty moccasins? I'm going to marry the invisible man, for wherever I look, I can see his face. But his father sighed. Daughter, he said, I'm sorry. I have no beads left for you, only some little broken shells. I have no buckskin dress, and as for moccasins, all I have left are my very old, worn, cracked, and stretched out pair from last year, and they're very much too big. But she said, whatever you can spare, I can use. And so he gave her these things. We're starting to develop now the conflict. The two evil sisters, remember, they wanted to marry the invisible being, but they couldn't see him. Now, who also wants to marry the invisible being? The rough-faced girl, right? She's saying she can see him. But the problem is, remember, what does she have to prove? She's got to prove to the invisible being sister that she can see him too. So let's see what happens. Listen carefully to this section. It's very descriptive. Then she found dry reeds, and taking the little broken shells, she strung a necklace. She stripped birch bark from the dead trees and made a cape, a dress, and leggings. And then with a sharp piece of bone, she carved in the bark pictures of the sun, moon, stars, plants, trees, and animals. She went down to the lake shore and soaked the moccasins in the water until they grew soft. And then she molded them to her feet, but they were still too big, and they flapped like duck's feet as she walked. And then all the people came out of their wigwams, and they pointed and stared. Look at that ugly girl, they laughed. Look at her strange clothes. Hey, go home, you ugly girl. You'll never marry the invisible being. But the rough-faced girl had faith in herself, and she had courage. She didn't look back. She just kept walking right through the village. What an amazing amount of courage it must have taken with people laughing at you. But believing in yourself, she's going to continue. So as we're getting closer to understanding what our plot is. The sisters are so mean to our rough-faced girl, okay? Especially even now, no one's being very supportive of her. But she is determined to marry the invisible being. As she walked on, she saw the great beauty of the earth and sky spreading before her. And truly she alone, of all in that village, saw in these things the sweet, yes, awesome face of the invisible being. At last she came to the lake shore just as the sun was setting behind the hills, and the many stars came glittering out like a fiery veil in the darkening of sky overhead. And there, standing on the water's edge, was the sister of the invisible being, waiting. Now, the sister of the invisible being was a wise woman, and when she looked at you, she didn't see just your face or your hair or your clothes. No, she looked at you, she would look you right in the eyes, and she could see all the way down to your heart. She could tell if you had a good, kind heart or a cold, hard, and cruel one. And when she looked at the rough-faced girl, she saw at once, though her skin was scarred and her hair burnt, her clothes strange, she had a beautiful, kind heart. And so she welcomed her dearly, saying, Ah, my sister, why have you come? And the rough-faced girl replied, I have come to marry the invisible being. What's going to happen? Ah, said the sister very gently now. If you want to marry him, you have to have seen him. Tell me, have you seen my brother, the invisible being? The rough-faced girl said, Yes. All right then, said the sister. If you have seen him, tell me, what's his bow made of? And the rough-faced girl said, His bow? Why, it's the great curve of the rainbow. Ah, exclaimed the sister in excitement. Tell me, she asked, if you've seen my brother, the invisible being, what's the runner of his sled made of? And the rough-faced girl, looking up into the night sky, said, "The runner of his sled? Why, it's the spirit road, the Milky Way of stars that spreads across the sky." "Ah," cried the sister in wonder and delight, "you have seen him. Come with me." And taking the rough-faced girl by the hand, she led her back to the great wigwam and sat her in the seat next to the entrance, and the wife's seat. Then she heard footsteps coming along the path closer and closer, and the entrance flap of the wigwam lifted up, and in steps the invisible being. And when he saw her sitting there, he said, "At last we have been found out." Then the smiling kindly he added, "Oh, my sister, but she is so beautiful." And his sister said yes. The sister of the invisible being then gave the rough-faced girl the finest of buckskin robes and the necklace of perfect shells. "Now bathe in the lake," she said, "and dress in these." So the rough-faced girl bathed in the waters of the lake, and suddenly all the scars vanished from her body. Her skin grew smooth again, and her beautiful black hair grew in long and glossy as a raven's wing. Now anyone could see that she was indeed beautiful, but the invisible being and his sister had seen that from the start. Then at last the rough-faced girl and the invisible being were married, and they lived together in great gladness and were never parted. So we know, as far as the problem, she has to prove herself to the sister of the invisible being that she can see the invisible being, right? Does she prove that to the sister? She does. And so part of that resolution towards the end is that what gets to happen? She gets to marry the invisible being, right? And all of her scars are wiped away. Her hair is restored, all to their original beauty. Okay? Now, we've read through this gorgeous story and has identified some of the story elements. We're going to return to some particularly descriptive passages here. Now, as I reread these portions to you, I want you to close your eyes and visualize. Get that movie going in your mind, right? Of what's happening in the story. And then we're going to talk about what we see in our minds. So let's go back to the page here. We're going to head back to page 10. Almost there. There we go. Where the sisters, what are they doing here? They're forcing their sister to continue and tend to the fire, right? Okay. They're these hard-hearted sisters. So let's read this. And what is it that you're picturing in your mind? Now in the village there lived a poor man who had 3 daughters. The 2 older daughters were cruel and hard-hearted, and they made their youngest sister sit by the fire and feed the flames while the burning branches popped and the sparks fell on her. In time, her hands became burnt and scarred. Her arms, too, became rough and scarred, and even her face was marked by the fire, and her beautiful, long, black hair hung ragged and charred. So, I'm picturing the flames just kind of like splashing out onto her skin, and her skin forming these horrible scars on her arm and the singeing of her hair. But I can hear almost like the sound of the popping of the flames around her. You can even see in the illustration here, you can see the little ashes flying around her. How horrible, right? Using those words like ragged and charred really kind of paint that picture in your mind. Now, if you're thinking about other places that are particularly, descriptive, there's another one I want to point out to you guys. And that was where she was going down here, and we were kind of the evil sisters, right? And they were walking along in their gorgeous new dresses. Okay, what is it you're picturing here? And I even love how they explained how they walked. Not that just they pranced through the town, but how they walked in a very snooty way. So their father gave them these things. Dressed in their finest, the 2 girls marched through the village, and all the people pointed and stared. "Look at those beautiful girls," they said. "Surely they will marry the invisible being." And as if those girls were proud and hard-hearted before, they were even prouder now as they walked haughtily through the village. And at last they came to the wigwam of the invisible being, and their sister was waiting. So you can see how kind of like they're walking in this proud manner. They do an excellent job in this illustration here, how their shoulders are back, their heads are held up high. Is this the way that the rough-faced girl walked through? Did everyone talk about how beautiful she was? No, it was very different, wasn't it, for her experience? So one other important portion, as I want us to revisit the ending. Okay, so we've talked about the beginning with her being charred and scarred. We've talked about sort of the middle as the sisters move on into trying to attempt to meet the Invisible Man. Okay, let's head back to the ending again. Okay, here we go. I'll let this load. The language that is used here, went a little too far. The language that is used to describe the way the rough-faced girl sees the invisible being. All right. And her transformation into this great beauty is extremely rich. Now close your eyes one more time and let me reread, okay, this final section to you. Here we go. Ah, exclaimed the sister in excitement. Tell me, if you have seen my brother, the invisible being, what's the runner of his sled made of? And the rough-faced girl looked up into the night sky and said, the runner of his sled? Why, it's the spirit road, the Milky Way of the stars that spreads across the sky. I love how she just, almost in awe, how she describes him. Now let me flip to where her transformation happens. The sister of the invisible being then gave the rough-faced girl the finest of buckskin robes and the necklace of perfect shells. Now bathe in the lake, she said, and dress in these. So the rough-faced girl bathed in the waters of the lake, and suddenly all the scars vanished from her body, and her skin grew smooth again. Her beautiful black hair grew in long and glossy as a raven's wing, and now anyone could see that she was indeed beautiful. But the invisible being and his sister had seen that from the start. Why I absolutely love that part so much is it really starts to hit home on the theme. Yes, on the outside, she was not very beautiful to look at, but did that matter to the invisible being and to his sister? No. They saw her beauty from the beginning. Okay? Now that we have absolutely read through that beautiful, beautiful story, okay? Your turn here. In your Google Doc, you're going to go through and you're going to be pulling out those story elements that we talked about. So why don't we review it one more time so you know exactly what to do, okay? Remember that these stories are originally part of an oral tradition and they're passed down from generation to generation. So let's retell the story together using these story elements. Are you ready? So, in the beginning, who are the characters we meet? We know about the invisible being, his sister. Who else? Oh, the two evil sisters, and of course, the rough-faced girl. Okay? All right, so here we go with our characters listed right here. So, these are the characters of the story. Now, where is this taking place? Do you remember? It was on the shore lakes of Ontario. So you'd have to go back to the beginning. So it was at Algonquin Village, remember? So by the shores of Lake Ontario is where the story took place. So in the beginning, we meet our characters, and it is set along the shores of Lake Ontario. What is the problem that they face? What does the rough-faced girl want? What's her conflict? Remember? She has to prove, if she wants to marry the invisible being, she's got to prove that she's seen him. Okay, so now as we go into the middle, she's going to go prove it to him. So what does she do towards the middle of the story to prove that she can truly see him? Remember? Let's take a look. Remember? So the cruelty of the sisters, the rough-faced girl, all right, that cruelty continues, all right? And the girls try to marry the invisible being, but do they? No, because they lie, and the sister can see that. So then finally, the rough-faced girl goes to prove that she can see him truly, okay? And so how does she do that? She goes to travel to the sister as well. And towards the end, as we resolve here, she does prove that she can see the invisible being, and therefore she marries the invisible being. Now, her scars, remember, she's able to bathe in the lake, and her scars and hair are all restored in that beautiful last section to their original beauty. As we talk more about the theme, I can see here that this theme of the story is going to be a little bit more about, yes, she was so courageous, but also her beauty, maybe, was it shown on the outside? Where did her beauty come from? It came from the inside. But at least at the end, the outside now matches her beauty on the inside too. All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed our lesson for today. Please remember our main story elements, character setting, problem plot, and then the resolution and theme at the end. Okay, continue to have a great week. Until next time.